it's a very interesting question, the whole business about verification of facts, and it in a way it kind of plays to a very key thing in in the past made us different. I'll tell you a little story. I mean, this has been the week in which we had the anniversary of 7/7, the bombings on the 7th of July, 2005. On that day, what happened was that we started getting reports of problems on the underground service, and the authorities, transport authorities, said that there were power surges that were causing these problems. And of course, that sounds weird and worrying, but it's obviously not the same as terrorism. And we went with that angle for a little bit, as did the BBC. So we were reporting, problems on the apparent explosions caused by power surges on the underground service. And then it became increasingly clear to us that this was not caused by power surges, it was caused by terrorist bombs, because our crime guy was talking to the police. We had people on the ground who were saying this doesn't sound right. So after a little while, when we were pretty convinced that these were not power surges, this was terrorist bombing, we changed our line. But the BBC didn't. BBC stuck with the power surge thing because that's what the authorities were saying, and the authorities didn't change their story. And it was about half an hour after we'd been saying we believe that these are a series of terrorist attacks that the BBC did it. Afterwards, BBC conducted, as only the BBC can, an internal investigation, internal inquiry into why. Well, what happened was they did some research, and they found that the audience generally believed that we had done a better job on the story than the BBC. So they had this inquiry to try and figure out what it was. And what they realised, and as a result they changed their policy, was that you have to trust the audience by telling them what you believe to be the truth based on all the evidence you have. So what we do, and we've always really done this, but it's I think a much more conscious policy, is that we tell people what our sources are, and we try to give them some idea of how to gauge and if you like, measure the value of the source. So for example, we'll say, we are hearing that a bomb has gone off in Paris, and the source is AFP, Agence France Presse, which is a French agency, which is good, but we know it's not quite as reliable as Reuters or the Associated Press. So we would say we're getting this from Agence France Presse, from AFP. It's the only source we have at the moment. We're trying to confirm it. When you get it on a second agency, then you can probably believe it's pretty much true, and at that point you would stop necessarily having to source it. You just say this is what's happened. So there is a moment at which we would make that call that we believe it to be true. Fairly obviously, the flakier the source, or the more unusual the source, the more heavily we caution on its value and whether or not we think it's definitely going to be true. And I think that is the way that news in the future is always going to be covered. It used to be done in the old-fashioned way, where if there was a newspaper comes out, or there's a TV news in the evening, where the editors would decide whether or not something was sufficiently verified to checked out, and then they would go with it. And if they weren't sure about it, then they didn't go with it. And that was the old-fashioned, that was certainly what the BBC did. And I think it's probably true of the old-fashioned approach to media. That just doesn't work anymore. In a 24-hour news cycle, what you have to do is you've got to share, you've got to trust the audience, you've got to share with them what you know and the sources you have, News doesn't just happen in a kind of clean way, does it? It comes out in dribs and drabs. Hey, have you heard this? Try to find out a bit more. What's going on? But of course, the thing is also that you have so many more ways that you can check stuff now than you used to. We used to rely on basically just agency wires. Now you've got so many sources and just people who see stuff, you know. So social media is really just a fantastic kind of source machine.